Interesting situation at the University of Florida that I want to get into. Can you explain what DEI is?
Yes. DEI is, and I get uncomfortable explaining this because people feel so strongly about it either way. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the idea is to try to involve more people of different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different races in any sort of industry.
Okay, now
Uh,
everyone's wondering why in the world are they talking about this? How can it affect my world of college football? Well, according to ESPN, the NAACP asked Black student athletes to reconsider their decisions to attend public colleges and universities in the state of Florida. In response to the University of Florida and other state schools recently eliminating those DEI programs. Wow. That can you imagine Tennessee doing something like that? Or can you
yes.
imagine Tennessee facing something like that? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, this happened a few years ago, and I wrote an article lambasting the state for this. Now, guys, now I don't think it's as big with DEI because that's so murky. And by the way, you can't throw a wet blanket over DEI. Every DEI program is different. Some go too far. Some are just trying to address, some actually think that there are qualified candidates that they're just missing out on because there's a lot of who you know hires, and they're trying to go beyond the who you know hires to see who's qualified. So a lot of times DEI is to actually help them find qualified candidates. Does that make sense? So you can't throw a wet blanket over DEI, just like you can't throw a wet blanket over anything. You can't label everything one thing. So it's a case by case basis.
Well, you don't mean a wet blanket. A wet blanket's like a downer. You mean you can't, it's not a cover all. Not every DEI is the same, right?
Yes, not
That's
every
what you,
DEI. Yes, not every DEI is the same. So
can't lump them
yes,
all together, to use another
right.
analogy.
Some have a DEI program because they just are like, we don't have enough qualified. What they'll say is, our talent pool, we're not finding enough people. Maybe we could find more qualified people of a different gender, ethnicity, and yeah, I don't want to get into that. But it did happen with Tennessee a few years ago because Tennessee attempted to pass a law. So basically, the ETSU women's basketball team took a knee during the national anthem, and Tennessee attempted to pass a law saying that if players for a team that if schools don't mandate their athletes stand for the national anthem, they would cut funding for those schools. Now, I lambasted Tennessee for that because whatever you feel about standing or kneeling for the national anthem, that's a free speech issue, and states should not get involved in free speech. Period. End of story. And what was going to happen was if you start compelling speech, which that was, you were going to get wrecked in recruiting. That was going to be a national story everywhere. One, because you were going to lose that case to the Supreme Court. So it was going to become a Supreme Court case that you were going to lose, and then you become famous for losing a case in which you tried to compel speech for your athletes, and you lose recruits. That would have hurt Tennessee. I'm not so sure this DEI thing is going to really hurt Florida as much, even with the activism, because look, there's no DEI in college football athletes. I mean, if you're a good athlete, you're going to get recruited to play no matter what. And so, but I always caution when people get involved in colleges like this, be careful. I've brought up Ole Miss before. Ole Miss religiously fought integration in the 60s. Then they spent 40 years basically letting everybody know they were very unhappy the South integrated. Didn't they, Dave? They basically just let you know straight up. Singing the South will rise again, singing all of those things. And Fred White on our show said he didn't go to Ole Miss or didn't even consider them because he saw Mississippi burning. And
yeah, you're right. He did say that. And I just wonder if, let's say you're in Valdosta, which is about halfway between Gainesville and Knoxville or Macon or wherever you are, and Georgia's not recruiting you, and you're down to two schools, and you're down to Florida and Tennessee. And Tennessee, the state, not the school, has gone to bat for NIL for you. And then on the other side, you have this DEI case where the state, the NAACP, is telling players not to go to state schools. That feels like a way different shoe to slip on if I'm a prospect heading to one of those two schools.
it does. It does. And I could see that. You're right. And that type of, I don't know how many players that affects, but I could see you saying, I could see that having a point in what you're saying. And that could end up being intriguing, very intriguing with DEI. So I don't know. But again, this is probably something that will come and go. But I'm not exactly sure how it's going to play out. And guys, I'm not going to comment on whether or not the DEI programs at the Florida schools are effective. I don't know. Okay. And so I think saying you're fully against DEI or you're fully for it, you're not being genuine because you don't know exactly how every program at every school or business is implemented.
Well, it doesn't though feel like that the deck is absolutely stacked against Billy Napier of Florida. No matter what happens. Jaden Rashada shows up, maybe not be his fault that the money wasn't there, and he's gone to Arizona. And then you're not a good coach. That's stacked against him. And then you have this. Just further illustrates how I think Florida could hit a downturn. Caleb, you're too young. You don't remember how it was always called the sleeping giant in the 80s before Steve Spurrier took over. It was bad. It was a heck hole. I mean, it was bad.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, all three Florida schools were sleeping giants. And I mean, go back to the U in Miami. Howard Schnellenberger, the difference between him and Bobby Bowden took the Florida State job because that was the only job he could get, really. He was coming out of West Virginia and just wanted a warmer climate. Howard Schnellenberger looked at Miami and he's like, man, if I just keep these South Florida kids here, like I could win a national title. And no one even noticed it. And so I totally agree. It's hard for me to say the deck is stacked against Billy Napier because there's one other gigantic advantage, and it's this. You're the only school in the SEC in Florida. And with the way college football is going, you are now at a premier. Back in the 80s and 90s, Florida State, Miami, and Florida all recruited on equal levels. But now the SEC school is that's going to be the selling point. You're the one in the SEC. So I think Florida will get first dibs on all Florida athletes from Miami to Tallahassee before Florida State or Miami does.